We're going to talk about the 802.11 Powersave mode. As you all know, 802.11 and Wi-Fi devices are prolific nowadays. We want more and more Wi-Fi. We see that all the time. And one thing people like about Wi-Fi, obviously, is that I don't have a network cable, right? So that's great. So I can get rid of the Cat 5, Cat 6, Cat 7, whatever, tether to my device, and I have a little bit more mobility. But another thing that we want also is when I get rid of that Ethernet cable, is I want to get rid of my power cable too. So we have a lot of battery-powered devices. So we're going to talk about 802.11 Powersave mode and how we can help our battery life and how Wireshark can help us analyze those, the behavior, and also help us troubleshoot. So my name is George Cragg. I work for Draeger Medical Systems in Andover, Mass. A little bit about me. I'm a network engineer for wired and wireless medical devices. We make medical devices like ventilators, anesthesia machines, patient monitors, and we put them on hospital networks. So our devices would then transmit clinical data with the obvious goal of improving patient outcomes. So that's kind of what we do, what I do today. I've had some other careers, kind of long, winding path to end up in this particular place. But I've done some other things. I would say in the late 90s, I started looking at packets on the network. So it was more of, say, like for fun. And then I got to include some of that into my work from a small amount. But I would say in the last 10 years or so, I've had the opportunity in industrial control and automation, as well as the medical devices. I get to look at Wireshark, say, almost on a daily basis. So that's been fun. That's kind of what I do. So a little bit about Powersave, and here's our agenda. Why we need it, or do we? Well, you guys get to decide, but certainly it's part of the specification. Lots of devices do it, so we ought to be able to troubleshoot and look at it. So we'll take some time to say, like, what does regular Wi-Fi look like? Of course, we could spend probably weeks looking at that topic. I have one slide just to cover the basic points of like what we'll need when we want to look at a packet capture of perhaps to troubleshoot Powersave. So we'll talk about things that we need to know. There's some moving parts here that have to work together, and obviously they don't always work together. So we got to understand what those are, and we'll cover those. We'll go through some different modes. So here's some examples I put together. We'll talk about legacy Powersave, how that works from a packet capture point of view. U-APSD, that's an improvement. And then what does a typical smartphone do? I call that the on-off mode. And we'll see how that looks from a packet capture point of view. But then I also have two examples. How does it break? Interestingly, they both have the exact same symptoms, but the root causes are different. I don't know how else to get to those root causes unless we use something like a packet capture. And some note here is this isn't complete, right? This is a 1 hour session. There's a lot more detail to this. There's other modes, and I'm sorry if I didn't cover your favorite Powersave mode, but these are the ones I run into all the time, so I thought I'd discuss these for the hour. I have the files available. I did have to anonymize some of them, but not others, to protect the, say, innocent or the guilty. That's fine. But they're available. They're there in GitHub, and I think it's part of the chat. Naomi pasted them in. So if you want to follow along, either now or later, so that's fine. So that's our agenda. So do you want longer battery life from your particular device? Like most people do. Smartphones, tablets, laptops. What about your new doorbell ringer or your temperature measurement system, right? Or your thermometer that you have in your house, your IoT devices. You want those to last longer. Your medical devices, you want those to last longer. Of course we do. So, most people do anyway, I would think so. So here's an example. So, I tell the hardware team where I work, I want to measure power for some devices. So they go off and they come back with a Fluke multimeter. I have one of those. Thank you. Can we do a little better? I want to trend this. I really want to look at it. I just don't want a number flashing in front of me up and down, right? So give me something better. So they go off and they come back, and I say, it's a machine that goes bing, right? So they bring this machine, they put it in, they give me some software, and now I get to trend power. I get to see how my devices behave, or any device behaves, under certain conditions. So the hypothesis that I work with is the network will consume a certain amount of power, and maybe the quality of the network will show based on, how the power changes. So we use that. So here's a particular example of a device, doesn't matter which one, with Powersave on, it pulls 479 milliwatts, so about a half a watt. And then with Powersave off, it's over 1 watt. So that's a factor of 2. So is that important? Well, yeah, in a lot of cases it is. So what does that mean? Well, it means I went from 12 to 24 hours of battery life. That's great. Or, maybe for a, given time span that I'm looking for, maybe the battery has to be half the size. Well, half the size is a good thing. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's half the price probably. The business loves that for sure. All of ours would. And it's also half the weight. So our customer likes that. So this is kind of, where we're headed with this. It can make a big improvement in, various things. So that's why we might want Powersave mode. Yeah, but of course with everything, there's no free lunch, right? Well, there is free Wireshark. This conference was free, but there's still no free lunch with it, right? We take a lunch break, but we're kind of on our own. We're all around the world, but as you know, with everything, there's no free lunch. So what's the cost here for real? It's latency. Latency will increase, right? Communication profile has an impact, full disclosure, that's fine, but I'm looking at worst case. And so here's some examples, right? ICMP echo response, we all know what that is. That's ping, that's great. And from wired to wireless side, we can see some changes in how latency sets up. In the middle there, where it says no PS, no Powersave, the latency we can measure is about 10 milliseconds. So this is smoke ping. Kind of subtly surprised me at how useful it was. Everybody knows ping, and then you graduate to F ping and H ping 3, great tools and all. But then I discovered smoke ping, and it's been quite nice. You just set up and just having latency and loss indicated in a graphical view, 24/7, 365 to your devices under all different kinds of scenarios and cases, or even just letting it sit and run and see what happens, has been enlightening. So it's been a great tool. And what's one of the principal issues with Wi-Fi that we run into? It's packet loss and dealing with that packet loss that we have. And this gives me an indication of that latency and packet loss at the same time on the same graph. So anyway, the no PS, no Powersave, about 10 milliseconds, a little less. That's great. But then as soon as I turn on Powersave, so look at the left there, that's U-APSD. It's one of the modes we'll cover. It goes up to 70 milliseconds. So that's a step change. Can your application handle it? I don't know. Right? Every application has to decide what they can do and not do. Most can, but not all. But you have to make the decision for yourself as a designer. But yeah, you see that. And then off to the right, it's U-APSD again, but we have this DTIM. We'll talk about that and what it means. But that's a setting you can set in your Wi-Fi infrastructure, and that will control some of the behavior that happens. And obviously, 2 is longer latency than 1, but also you can infer correctly that you'll probably get better battery life out of 2 versus 1. So that's the trade-off. So, more Powersave, great. Yeah, at the cost of more latency. So that's just the way it goes. So regular Wi-Fi. So with no Powersave in play, the AP and client are free to transmit frames at any time. Of course, there's plenty of 802.11 rules, right? So I'm not saying break the rules, but there's no, there's no waiting or time-based, holding off due to Powersave issues that we're going to talk about, or not issues, but behavior or design behavior. So, the access point's always on. It's on mains power. It doesn't do Powersave. It can transmit frames when it wants to or needs to per 802.11 rules. And so could a client. If a client is not in Powersave mode, it can just transmit whenever it's available, and 802.11 rules allow it to. So we have that. But we should talk about some of this basic Wi-Fi stuff. So we have an SSID. So when you go into Starbucks and you say, I want to connect to the free, the free insecure network that I'm going to get hacked on. Yeah, that one, right? You open up your iPhone, you check the settings page, and look at that list of networks, right? Those are SSIDs. That's the network name. Typically, in a high-level view, that's mapped to a VLAN at the back end. So an SSID is basically a VLAN. Not always, but typically that's the way it works. So that's like to the VLAN, and then you would then associate to that. But in a simple case where you have one access point, that's fine, right? You have one SSID, it's being broadcast out of there, you connect to it, you know where your data is going, and that's fine. But that's not how enterprise deployments go. Enterprise deployments have many more than one access point. They don't have two, they have hundreds, and they have thousands. I've seen 10,000 access points, in a campus environment, a large campus environment. So they could all be broadcasting the same SSID. So how do I know as a client exactly which access point I'm talking to? They all could support that SSID and therefore the VLAN, but how do I know which access point I want to be on? And that's called a BSSID, and it's a MAC address. So the top access point that the little graphic shows that he's connected to will have a BSSID. But if he connected to the bottom access point, he'd be on the same SSID with the same VLAN, but the BSSID would be different. And so what happens with Powersave, as soon as you get the first Powersave client on that BSSID, it can change the behavior for everyone else. That's why this is an important topic, to know what you're connected to and what you're not, and how things are affected. So some rules of our game that we have to play here. These are some requirements we're going to have, some things we're going to have to deal with. So the wireless clients will have to signal to the AP that they want to be in Powersave mode, that they're sleeping. Some call it doze state, as compared to the opposite where you say, or you're awake, right? Or you're active. That's when you're can transmit frames at any time and receive frames at any time. But imagine when you're sleeping, you're in a doze state, you're not really able to receive frames. You're not transmitting anything, but you can't receive them either. So we need a mechanism, and there is one, where we're going to, as a client, tell the AP that, hey, I'm sleeping and you need to take action for me. So that's something we have to set up. There's also some traffic types we have to manage. So recall that, say, on wired networks, so for Ethernet, you have three types of traffic: unicast, multicast, and broadcast. Here it's condensed to two. I have unicast and group, and that's fine. It's kind of how Wi-Fi does it. So group is basically multicast and broadcast together, and that's fine. But, on wired, we want specific functionality out of the different traffic types. What is broadcast for? If you think of how broadcast is handled, it's special rules. Well, where do the rules come from? Convention, RFCs, and specifications. Say broadcast, I want to handle a specific way. What's the forwarding rule for broadcast traffic at layer 2? You hit a switch. By convention, we say, I want to forward that to all ports. And then what does the host stack do with that? Well, he sends it up, right? So that's a broadcast mechanism that we have that we want to maintain. So we have this group concept in unicast. But I will say some of the smarter Wi-Fi infrastructures will try to offload some of that broadcast mechanism and requirements on your behalf, say as a client. They will try to learn your IP. So what's the most common use of broadcast, say at a minimum that you would need? And let's say that's ARP. If you want to talk to someone who's local to you on your same subnet, you need a little bit of ARP broadcast, that's fine. But the wireless controller access point might learn your IP, and he might proxy for you and answer ARPs on your behalf. And that way you actually see that broadcast on the network. So in a way to improve efficiency. But in some cases, we still need group traffic to go, but we have these two types to manage. And we need mechanisms to manage those two types. Also, we need clients will have to agree to wake up at certain intervals to collect at least group traffic. Basically, the concept of group traffic, right, is like you send one and everyone sees it. And that's the idea. If we want to keep that concept, the access point is going to send one of this group traffic type. And that's it, which means that all the clients have to be awake at that particular point in time. So we need a mechanism so that all clients can be in sync and to get that group traffic. So we'll need a mechanism for that. The AP will only buffer so much for sleeping clients. That's kind of obvious, right? At some point, you'll run out of memory. I've never taken or tested that limit. I don't know what it is. We'd have to ask the Wi-Fi vendors, what that would be. But at some point, we'll run out of buffer space. Don't know when that would be, though. And then finally, APs don't sleep, right? They're on mains power, so clients can send data to DS, it's called. Distributed system is DS. So clients send data to DS whenever they want. So a client can just wake up and send data whenever it's convenient for him. The AP is always available, of course, following 802.11 rules. The reverse direction traffic is the AP sends data to the client, and that's called from DS, from the distributed system. It's also good to know in most of the Wi-Fi infrastructures that we use, clients don't directly talk to each other. You would always talk to the AP, and then the AP would forward the traffic. So for instance, if you wanted to ping another wireless client and it's allowed, you'd see 2 frames if you were doing a packet capture. You'd see the ping request going to the AP, and then the ping request leaving the AP, then going to the other client. And you'd see 2 on the reply. That's kind of how that works. So some other things we need. OTA capture capability. This is the hard one, right? So OTA, over the air, also known as, some would call it, say, monitor mode. Some call it Wi-Fi capture, 802.11 capture, whatever. I think Mike Kershaw from the Kismet guy had a discussion yesterday on some of this topic. He's got some nice tools that help with this, but having this capture capability is important in troubleshooting these topics, because we need to have a look at control and management frames to see how Powersave is working. Just looking at data frames isn't enough. If you just look at data frames, you're just going to say the data's back here. Well, yeah, that we know that. I didn't get a ping reply. So yeah. So Wireshark just says, yeah, the ping wasn't there. We need to go deeper to the next level. So we need to look at control and management. And we really do need healthy OTA capture capability. This can be hard, sometimes impossible, especially for new technology. Picking up traffic, over OTA for 11AX is quite difficult nowadays because it's new. There are some things you can do, but sometimes you need hardware and you just might not have it, right? So we do the best we can. That's all I can say. If digital have an N or older or AC, we're in pretty good shape. We can get capture. So we're lucky. But I'll tell you, most of the managed infrastructure vendors, the high-end ones, without naming names, they all provide some level of this capability. So in some ways good, and I'll take that if that's all I have available to me. But there's a general concept here that even if you're new to these, packet capture or the SharkFest, you've heard from others, you really want to avoid the use of the system under review to collect your diagnostic data. So just same thing if you're trying to troubleshoot TCP, grabbing it on the end hosts. You take that if you have to, but if you can put a tap in and see what's really on the wire from an independent view, that's almost always better. And it's the same thing here. The access point's, in line with the traffic, and then he's telling me his point of view, for better or worse. Well, what if I think he's the one causing the problem? Again, it's not always best. So I'd rather have a third party take the Wi-Fi capture if at all possible. So there's that general rule. And I'll also tell you, be wary, because I've seen issues with infrastructure packet capture. Every one I've run across, I don't use it often, but the half a dozen or so that I've come across to do, there's always something with it that's causing me issues. Like, for instance, the control traffic we need, and we'll talk about here for Powersave, isn't passed up. Well, okay, then I can't troubleshoot these Powersave issues if it's not passed up. Another one, wouldn't pass, or he wouldn't send up his own beacons. You can see beacons that he received from, the Wi-Fi space around him, but you wouldn't see his beacons. Well, as we'll discuss with Powersave, beacons are very important in the Powersave mechanism. So if I can't see my own beacons, I can't troubleshoot my own Powersave problems from that way. And then there's other issues like that. So anyway, be wary of that. So great feature, nice to have, but an independent third-party view of OTA capture is really critical to get much mileage out of this. So some things we need. We need an association ID for each client. All right, so this is provided by the AP in the association response frame during the authentication association process. So I will get that AID. So for every client on the BSS ID, you're going to be assigned this ID, this number. So great, starting at 1, it doesn't matter. Typically it starts at 1, and you get it, and then we're going to need it. If typically under the hood, you'd never deal with it, you wouldn't know, but it's there, and you especially need it if you're doing Powersave. If you don't do Powersave, I'm actually not sure where it is used otherwise. It's probably used under the hood to manage some things. But I've got a packet capture here. We'll take a look at it. So I've got this one filtered. This should look somewhat familiar to us. Right, some probing, authentication, open, request reply, association request response, and then a 4-way handshake. Anybody who's done any wireless work with OTA captures would recognize this as WPA2 personal. So with a PSK, which most of us run at home, most businesses would do enterprise, so it would look a little bit different. but this is what we have. But in the association response coming from the access point, if I open him up and I look at the fixed parameters, I can see my association ID. I get a status code. So if it failed, I might want to look there for the status code of why it failed. It might give me a clue. But this was successful, and I get an association ID. And this guy is 1, so that's fine. Could be 1, 2, whatever. Some questions come up. Well, what happens if you disconnect for some reason and come back in? Do you get the same number? Sometimes. Do you get a different number? Sometimes. Depends on the infrastructure, depends on what's going on. And so I'll say for my particular use cases in a hospital, we have mobile devices that go around with patients as they're wheeled around. And let's say they're going from their room down to a test and they have to ride in the elevator. They might get in the elevator and their wireless device might disconnect. And so they come back on. Do they keep the same association ID? Not always sure. So you can get it here off the capture, but what if you miss it? Actually, a nicer place to get it, if you can, is off the Wi-Fi infrastructure. Maybe you can log into the AP or the controller, or you can get the admin to do it for you, and they can run their show command, show client summary, whatever, and it might have a table of all the clients with the association ID. So that's a good place to get it from. But here it is, if you had to get it from an independent third-party view. So it's good to know. So good to know. We'll need that. So let's move that out of the way. Sorry. Maybe that's better. Yep. So, beacons. So another thing we need. Beacons are produced by the access point for each BSSID. This is typical. So every about 100 milliseconds. So it's actually 102.4 per specification. But what's a couple of milliseconds among friends, right? So we say 100 milliseconds, the beacons come out. So that's how when you're at Starbucks and you're looking for that insecure network to connect to, right, and you're scrolling through the networks that are available, that's how you see the SSID. You can also get it by probing, but all the beacons are there. And typically they will be advertising the network, and that's the SSID name. And you'll see it, and it'll show up, and it comes out every 100 milliseconds. But this contains some things for us that we're going to need. Okay, so sorry about that. So it's got some things we're going to need. One of them is the TIM map. So what's in a beacon is a series of information elements, just giving details of the network. It's actually a treasure trove of information if you want to see what's going on and you can interpret it correctly. It's really good stuff. So we have a TIM map, and that's what we're going to use for our Powersave. So remember, we had 2 types of traffic we had to deal with. So I need 2 mechanisms. And I had unicast and group traffic, right, to be able to deliver to clients. So let's talk about group traffic for a minute. So in the TIM map, and there it is at the bottom, and we'll open Wireshark in a minute and see it in situ, but I did copy it out. The DTIM period is 1. So every DTIM period, group traffic is sent. So you interpret that to be that all clients would be awake for this event. So a DTIM period of 1 means that every beacon period, every 100 milliseconds, we expect the clients to wake up because group traffic would be sent if there is any. If there isn't any, well, then there isn't any. And the client didn't want to do anything, he can just go back to sleep. But he would have timed his wake-up cycle to be in sequence with the beacons, and they're coming out periodically so they can adjust their timing slightly to stay on track. And they would wake up to get group traffic. So every DTIM period, group traffic is sent, so all clients wake up. So the other part to this is the partial virtual bitmap. This is how we deliver unicast traffic. So that's a bitmap, and it's tied to the AIDs, the association IDs. So if the access point has unicast data buffered for a client, right, he'll set the appropriate bit corresponding to the AID. And so when the client reads that the PVB, partial virtual bitmap, he would know the access point has data for me because I know my AID as a client as well. And then we would, take action to get the data. So let's look at this in situ here. Escape. Go back. So here's some beacons. So have a look at one. So some beacons. So beacon, we can play of them. So look at the timing, delta T. Love the delta T column. In Wireshark, about 102 milliseconds apart, give or take. So that's good. So that's consistent. We open up the wireless management data frame. We look at tag parameters. and we can find ourselves a TIM map right here. So here we go. So in this case, DTIM period is 1. So that's every beacon period. So the count is always 0. So when the count is 0, you need to be awake. But if the period's 1, the count is always 0. And then we have the partial virtual bitmap at 0. So what does that mean? You can interpret that as the access point does not have any data for the clients. So here's one. I put the association ID here in a column, right? Wireshark's great that way. So again, DTIM period's still 1, so nothing changed there. I still have no multicast. But in this case, the partial virtual bitmap is set for association ID 2. So that there is data buffered for that device on the AP. And then the client should come through, see that, and then take action to get delivery. So that's how that's going to work. So we're going to talk about some of those mechanisms here. Oh, by the way, yeah, here's some filters too. So this is how you'd filter for a beacon if you'd like one. That's all beacons. Typically, you might want just your BSS ID, so you could add that, and there'll be an example of that later. But type subtype for a beacon 0x08. That's a common filter that I would use. So DTIM, this is for group traffic. When count is 0, any group traffic buffered at AP will be sent by AP. So all clients should be awake. We walked through that example already. And the way we interpret this, that all clients will wake up every beacon period to listen for the beacon if DTIM is set to 1. It's very common to set that to 1. And again, that is usually adjustable at the Wi-Fi infrastructure level. I run across some systems every once in a while where you can't change that. In that case, it's typically set at 1. But most allow you to adjust that one way or another. And I like 1 to optimize my latency, but it's totally dependent on your application and what you want it to be. I've most systems default to 1, but I've seen some do 2 or 5. So again, totally up to you and what you feel is necessary and how your devices work, and can you deal with that latency. So DTIM directly impacts how group traffic is delivered, but as a side effect, it does impact how unicast traffic is delivered as well, because by agreement, the clients are supposed to be awake at the DTIM period to get group traffic if there is any, right? Because that's sent once. There's no retry for that, certainly at the network level. Application layer, you could have something, but we don't for that type of broadcast traffic. So it directly impacts group traffic. But while you're awake, why don't you go ahead and look for your TIM map? So you're awake already for DTIM, for group. We'll go ahead and look at the partial virtual bitmap in there and look for you. So if there's any data for you, you can then take action to get unicast data delivered. So the DTIM actually impacts both group, which is broadcast and multicast, as well as unicast traffic at the same time. So it impacts both. So we had the partial PVB we saw. I called it out here in a column, but we just looked at that in Wireshark. And there is a filter for that as well, tim.aid. Just a couple of years ago, that used to not be there. Someone put in a change request, and it was kind of nice. Some competitive products to Wireshark had that called out before too. Now Wireshark does it, and it's great. So it's a little easier to search, especially on busy traces, so we can see. But yeah, we'll set that association ID bit in the partial virtual bitmap, and it tells the clients what data is available, so that we can get it. And we saw that in the beacons capture. So some flags we're going to need too. So remember, I had this requirement where the client has to tell the access point that it's going to sleep, and it does that with a flag. We'll look at that in a packet capture in a second. But it's the power management. I call it the capital P. So the flags are called out in the info column in Wireshark, and it's a capital P. And the client will set the P bit, the capital P bit, to inform the AP that's going to sleep. And then that will instruct the access point to take action, and what action would that be? It must now buffer unicast frames for that device. Also, it indicates it has to change the way it delivers group traffic. If this is the first Powersave client on there, it now needs to only send group traffic at the DTIM. If there were no power management or sleeping clients on the system before, on that BSS ID, it was free to just transmit the group traffic when it came in. But the first Powersave client that comes along will then change the delivery for all clients that might be on there. Now, it might just be that all your clients on that BSSID are PowerSafe, so it wouldn't matter, but that's just isn't generally true, and especially in a public setting. You could have all different kinds of clients. Some are awake, some are sleeping, whatever. And so, but we affect group traffic delivery by having the first PowerSafe client on that BSSID. So that's how the client tells the access point what to do. Obviously, the access point wouldn't use the power management bit. The access point's always awake because it's on mains power. Now, the access point has a bit that it has to manage, and it's called the more bit. The more data, it's a lowercase m, and only the access point would use this. And this is used to inform the client that more data is available. So let's say, data is buffered, and we used one of the, mechanisms that we're about to talk about to get data delivered, unicast data delivered. And what if there's more data there, right? So the access point would set that M bit and to indicate to the client that, hey, I have more data for you. So the client can then take action. Well, what action is that? Well, maybe nothing. Maybe he needs to do more stuff to trigger more download or whatever. In general, I would want to say in a vacuum that maybe the client shouldn't go to sleep until he's emptied the buffer, drained the buffer, so to speak, and the M bit is clear. But that isn't always what happens, but that's fine. But anyway, that's how the signaling works. So client signals to the access point with the capital P bit, power bit that's going to sleep, and then if there's extra data or more frames in the buffer for a particular client, right, then the more bit will be set. So let's actually go through one of these mechanisms. This is called legacy power save. So how is this going to work? So the client is going to indicate to the access point that it's going to sleep by setting the P bit. Okay, we'll see that in the packet capture in a second. Every DTIM period, client wakes up and looks for TIM entry for its AID, association ID, to see if unicast traffic is buffered. If the AID is set, data is available, so we'd want to get that to come downlink, and he'll do that by sending a trigger frame. That particular trigger frame is called a PS poll. So the client will send a PS poll, it'll get acknowledged, and then the client knows, the access point knows this client's awake and has asked for data in the buffer. The access point will deliver a single frame. If more data is available, he'll set the M bit in that frame, and then the client will see that and then issue another PS poll, and they'll go on that little loop until the M bit is cleared. So if there's multiple, frames in that buffer, we'll need multiple PS polls to get there. So let's look at that in a packet capture. T2. So here's legacy. This is what this looks like. So we have our beacon frames again, right? So no trouble. Beacon frames, 102 milliseconds apart. Oh, we missed this one. So what happened? Well, 200 milliseconds, I probably missed it. And we can actually look at the sequence numbers, 373, 4, 5 is the missing one, 6. Does that matter? Probably not. With wireless, it's quite common that we missed it. And just because we missed it doesn't mean anybody else did. Kind of the way it works. But we finally get to this one, and I'll go ahead and mark it. Right? We can mark it. We can see. Let me open up. I have the association ID called out, but you can see that's the first one. And if I open my traffic indication map, yep, there we go. Association ID 1. All right. So we have data in the buffer. So we're doing legacy power save. So the client, this device, will issue a power save poll. Notice the capital P bit. That's fine. He's still telling the access point, I'm sleeping, but here's a power save poll. Please give me a data frame that you told me you had for me. Okay, so we can look in here. What's in the PS poll? In particular, the association ID. Very convenient, right? So in that case, I don't so much need the association response or to pull it out of the Wi-Fi system itself. The power save poll will give me that directly, so it's kind of nice. But so there's the power save poll. It gets acknowledged, and then here's the data frame. It's from, that's what the F is for, that's from DS. And notice the M, more bit. There's more data. So what's the client to do? Per agreement, per the specification, IEEE 802.11, he'll issue another power save poll. Get an acknowledgement, more data comes down. So no problem. We do this until the M bit is clear. So, okay, M bit's there, power save poll, get an acknowledgement. Oh, what's this one? Okay, this one's 2. Remember, the client can send data to DS to the access point whenever he wants. That's all he did there. So no trouble. Not a big deal. That's acknowledged. And then I already have an outstanding PS Paul. So here's the downlink frame. And then we just go back and forth here until data is clear. And I'm probably doing a ping, and you see from and to with M bits. So that's kind of how that works. It's kind of the agreement. But I wanted to show, I think I left the speaking ones open. So let's look at this one. This is the first one we looked at. Yeah, this is Ubiquity. Yeah, so a different system. It's a TV. I have my oldest child's in college, but he's home now due to COVID. So he's taking his junior year from home while the college campus is closed. So we bought him a TV. So he's got a TV. And of course, the TV wants to be on the networks now, right? First thing you do when you plug in a TV is it downloads firmware updates, right? I guess I'm dating myself. We didn't have that when I was younger, right? We do that on a new TV. So here's this one. So here's the no association ID. We finally get one. So here's the Vizio TV, issues the Powersave Paul. So clue, what kind of Powersave mechanism is he using? Well, he's legacy. We can tell because it's Powersave Paul. Acknowledge. And then here's the answer from the access point. QoS null. Interesting, right? You just told me you had a data frame for me, and then you give me a null frame. Null is just a signaling frame. It's nothing. It's just signaling. Basically the access point saying, yes, I see your PS poll, but I have nothing for you. And I would argue you just told me you had something for me. So for those who play basketball, this is the equivalent, in my point of view, is the access point head fake. He's faking us out here. So don't know what's going on here. Never going to get an answer from Ubiquity either. So good luck on the forum with that one for those who like those products. So, okay. So that's legacy, right? So pretty straightforward. It is simple. Pros, simple, right? We know what to do. You set the TIM map entry set for me with my AID, and then I issue PS polls until the M bit's clear, and then I go back to sleep. So no trouble. But what are some of the cons here, right? I need to issue a PS poll for every frame downloaded. Not that efficient, right? Everything's kind of predicated on those PS polls going out. It just makes the network busier. So is it really needed? But in general, too, we have latency here, right? Latency can be up to the DTIM period just for Powersave. The end host could have their own latency, and there can be other latency in the network, right? But just for DTIM produces latency. And just waiting for PS polls to go can make it untenable depending on the application. So just to note, this often affects wireless clients and server contexts more. Your smartphone, when you're surfing the web, you're the client and not the server. So you might wake up, send the data out, and wait for it to come back. So we just see when the wireless client is a server context, you might suffer from latency a little bit more. So, and also remember, the Powersave client can transmit data at any time. So it can just wake up and send data whenever. He's not bound by any other rule besides the typical 802.11 channel access rules. So U-APSD, can we make this better? Sure we can. So here's a new one that came with the WMM specification from Wi-Fi Alliance. So unscheduled automatic Powersave delivery, right? So this improves on legacy Powersave mode by allowing us to have other trigger frames. So remember, PS poll was a specific trigger, and I needed one for each frame. But they said, well, how can we improve this? Well, let's make it so that basically any data frame, not quite, but anyway, basically most data frames can trigger a downlink. So I don't need a PS poll. So what happens if I wake up and I have a frame to send? Well, I can just send it, but that also acts as a trigger frame. It's just more efficient. I don't have to send that data frame and then deal with PS poll as well, right? So just about any data frame can trigger a downlink. But also, it's not a one-to-one anymore. I don't need a trigger frame to downlink a single frame. A single trigger frame now can drain the buffer. So that can help, right? I needed one PS poll per data frame before, but now I don't. But what if I don't have a frame to send? That's okay. Remember, I can use these nulls again, right? They're signaling frames. So I can send a QoS null in lieu of other data frame, and that can be used as a trigger. If no downlink data is available, the AP will send a QoS null. We saw that before with legacy, whatever. The AP said data was there, but didn't give me anything. Okay. I still use the P bit, the capital P bit for power management bit to signal client is going to sleep. And QoS is also supported here. I'm not really discussing that, but you can do more advanced stuff with QoS. So let's look at T3 packet capture, and then we'll talk about how this mechanism works, and we'll talk about how you negotiate it or advertise that you support it. So here we go, beacons again, and finally get an association ID. Here it is with 1. So you imagine every beacon comes out. What's the DTIM period? We'll check. DTIM period for me is almost always 1 if I set up the network for other reasons, or unless there's another reason not to. Yep, DTIM's 1. So clients waking up every beacon period, there's nothing to do because the association ID TIM map is clear, that bitmap. So we just go back to sleep. But finally we get one. I'll mark him. Okay, so it's time to execute our U-APSD mechanism fully. My AID shows, and I will issue a QoS null function in this case to trigger. So I don't have anything to send. That's fine. But I noticed the data was available for me. So it took about 1.25 milliseconds after the beacon came out to get access to the network and issue the trigger frame that gets acknowledged. And then look what happens. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. More bits set, which means there's still data in the buffer. They're not duplicates, right? The sequence numbers are different, 1533, 34, 35, etc., right? They're all from. So he's starting to drain the buffer. And we get a block ACK. Oh, so this is nice and efficient now. So I send one trigger frame, and then I got block ACKs besides. So this is significantly more efficient than the legacy mode was. We've got nice data rates. I know this particular client is a one spatial stream short card interval, 20 megahertz. So 802.11n, so it's 72.2 megabit per second data rate. So we got full data rate, so it's nice. But there's lots of data in the buffer, as you can see. I probably did a flood ping. That's what I'm guessing. And so I got the capture just at the right time. Where there was none, I start the flood ping, and then here they come. And there's just lots of data coming down. But as you can see, I don't need a PS poll for every one of these. This is much more efficient as we go, as are the block ACKs. So that helps too. So this is kind of how it works in action. I didn't have a frame to send. Remember, if I had a frame to send as a client, I could have used that here, like QoS data going out. That would have been enough to trigger downlink as well. But here I didn't have one, so I used QoS null. It's kind of the equivalent of the PS poll for legacy. So we have that mechanism. So let's look at this other one. So that's in use. But how do they announce support for U-APSD? What I found on systems, it's kind of like it's a priority. So if U-APSD is supported by the client and the access point, it'll be used. If one of them doesn't support it, then they drop the legacy. So there's a number of frames where the access point will advertise that he supports it. One place is in the beacon frame, so we'll look at that. This is how the access point is going to advertise support for that field or for that functionality. So I want the WMM parameter element. So here we go. I open him up, WME, QoS, and U-APSD enabled. Right, so there we go. That's how the access point, well, in one of the frames, there's a couple other different ones as well. He'll advertise support for U-APSD there. So that's from the infrastructure side. How does the client advertise support? That's in the association request. If let me close this and then open and tag parameters, it's information elements again. Here's the WMM one. So here we go. QoS info. Right here. This is how you can engineer QoS in the solution. But in my case, I have it set that all traffic is treated the same. So all of the access classes all have a 1. So that means U-APSD is enabled for all traffic classes. You can mix it. You can have some that are done by U-APSD and some are done by legacy. But typically, for our use case that I have to deal with at the office, we would have all the same. So that's how he advertises support. And then if both sides agree, then it's in use. And that's how they advertise what's going on. So for the last mechanism we can talk about, say like a modern smartphone that I've seen, I don't really have to troubleshoot these or work with these. It's just, if I turn on a packet capture and look at my device, what do I see? This is an Apple device I took an example of. This is an on-off mechanism. So for whatever reason, and one of those reasons might be that my TIM entry is detected, I just turn off Powersave mode. Well, how do I do that? I send a frame that needs to be acknowledged with the P-bit clear, that power management bit clear. There's specific rules in the 802.11 specification on what types of frames, but in general, broad overview, with any frame that needs to be acknowledged is typically enough. That's what I see. Data, null function, stuff like that. So we send that with the P-bit clear. So that indicates to the access point that you can change the the state of the client, and he's no longer in Powersave. So if he's no longer in Powersave, what does that mean? That I could just downlink my unicast frames to him. I don't even need the M bit anymore. Right? I don't need to tell him anything like that. So, and when you're done doing your work, right, you just re-enable. So here's an example, but let's go ahead and look at that in Wireshark. Look at an Apple device. So let's see, Q&A. How to capture 802.11 packets. So we had that in the beginning. Not that easy, but we need a whole big discussion on that. So maybe at the end we can talk about that a little bit more. That's one of the questions we got, how to capture 802.11. But obviously, if you want to do this work, you need an OTA capture to capture 802.11 packets, for sure. It's difficult, but we need special hardware. So we'll talk about that. So here's on-off. This will be another OTA capture. So beacon frame, right? So good, 100 milliseconds, excellent. And then finally, my association ID triggers. And then, that's on for a while, right? But where's my client, right? There's the client. Why did the client take that long? I'll have Wireshark tell me. Set time reference. Why did it take 1.2 seconds for the client to wake up and decide to, remember the P-bit's clear here, right? It took 1.2 seconds for the client to recognize that unicast data was buffered for him at the access point. Why is that? I have no idea. We'd have to ask Apple. No clue. Wouldn't even know who to ask over at Apple, but if we ask them, maybe they could tell us how their system's working, and that's fine. But anyway, I guess this is probably one of my kids' cell phones, and they weren't complaining about throughput or anything else. And believe me, I have to schedule downtime on my home network now, especially with COVID in the kids' home, and my wife's a teacher, and so we have to schedule downtime on the Wi-Fi, right? Just like the office, where they send out the email saying these are the maintenance activities. Well, we have that in the Cragg household as well. So if they had a Wi-Fi problem, I'm the first to hear about it. So anyway, they're not complaining, so I'm not going to chase that issue. But here we go. I turn off the P-bit, so I go active, and then I get a data frame. I don't need the M-bit, and here's another data frame from the AP. That's fine. No M-bit. You can just send them to me because I turned off Powersave. I'm not in that mode anymore. And then finally, when I'm all done my work, here's the null function, and I turn Powersave back on. So now the access point knows that he's got to buffer for me. He didn't have to while I had it off, but he has to again. So those are kind of like the three mechanisms that we would have. How does it break? And it does break. It breaks spectacularly sometimes too. So there's a forum. I don't remember which one. I don't know. MikroTik, Ubiquiti, AirHive, Cisco. I don't know. Download speed was bad, but upload speed was great. So asymmetric throughput. So if you think about upload, that's like almost totally client dependent. The client can just be awake if he wants to and transmit frames without a problem. But download's a little bit different. Download, we have this lot of moving parts, right, to get data out of the EP, especially when Powersave. So that's a clue. It's something I clue in on. When I see asymmetric speeds like that, I think Powersave, especially if it's a cell phone or like a laptop or a tablet, something like that that's battery powered. I think Powersave mode. Also, excessive latency, or even more of a clue is variation in latency. Yeah, sometimes it works fast and sometimes it doesn't. Right, so that would give me a clue. Poor battery life's another one that could give me a clue how it could break. But so I look at problems like this with three components, right? So what root cause is an onion, there's layers. So I say layer 0. What's my first cut root cause? Is it client, AP, or environment? Everything's in the three bins. That's where I start. If it's a client, it's my problem. Yeah, I make clients. If it's an AP, I've got to go, engage the vendor. Or if it's environment, we've got to talk to the asset owner, the hospital or whoever, is using our equipment and see what's happening there. But, at first cut, can I identify which bin my problem goes into? So let's try. So here's failure example 1 of how Powersave mode can go bad. So here's the symptom. I can't ping sometimes. You've probably all heard that, if not seen that as well. This in particular is a U-APSD example, and that should be clear from the trace at some point, right? But can't ping sometimes. Okay, it's common. Or they're really long, and then they go away, and then they come back. There's some ping variation. It's all kind of the same. So my strategy, start with no capture filter on the channel. Why? Right? So if we were in a room, I'd ask you to yell out to me what the answer is here, but it should be a uniform answer. It's because I don't want you to throw away data. As soon as you throw away data, as in you set a capture filter and you're ignoring certain things, you've made the decision that that data that you've gotten rid of is not part of the root cause. And I say, well, if you can throw away data because you know it's not part of the root cause, I'll ask you, what's root cause? Well, we don't know. So how can you throw it away? So I do not like capture filters. And I tell my users at the office that please do not run a capture filter. Allow me to filter the data completely to see if we can, identify some things. Once you know root cause, I'm much more comfortable with the capture filter. But until we have root cause, please do not use the capture filter for this. We also get large amounts of data, just something we have to deal with. But so if we think it's Powersave mode, I need to see my client data. So here we go. Oops, sorry. That's this first filter, WLAN-ADDR 4:2. All I'm doing is slicing the MAC address, give me the last 2 octets. That way I make a lot of typos if I have to type the full MAC address. So that allows me to subset and just gives me the last 2 octets. That's almost always good enough for me. But that's not enough, right? This is a system with moving parts. I have the client behavior, but I need the beacons too from the access point because they're part of downlink delivery too, right? With the TIM map, and I have to know. So I would do the OR as well. My BSSID, and I just subset it in the same way, and then and beacons. So that's kind of the filter I would want. And there's 2 other types of filters I show. If you want to find the AID for a client from the Wireshark capture, from the association response, but of course you can get that from the access point of the infrastructure too. Or if you want to show the specific AID as well. Sometimes I need that, but usually it's number 1. ID number 1 is the filter I would use. So let's look at T6 and let's see what he did. Let's see how he's rolling. All right. So I already know my association response. So, nope, sorry. No, 802.11. I want 0B. That's me. That's my AID. So when I look at AID, here we go. 0B. Here's the beacon frame with my bit set. So the access point is telling me he has data for me. So I issue a QoS null as a client. That's a trigger frame. And when I look at that one, what's that? Oh, that one's 2. So that's not from. The access point didn't give me any data. He took that from me and acknowledged it. Okay. I get another beacon. My AID is set again. So the access point's telling me data's for me. So in this case, I don't do a QoS null. I just do a data frame. That's enough as a trigger, right? And then here's another one. Oh, and here's a beacon frame. I have data for you. So I issue a QoS null. Here's a trigger frame. Where is the data? We should see the problem here. The 0B is in every TIM map, yet I'm not getting any data coming out of the access point. That's a clue. So of my bins here, right? Recall I have 3 bins. Is that the client is the access point of the environment. I see no evidence of an environmental issue. So is it a client issue? Well, AP issue? Well, what's the AP role? Indicate buffered data. Then the client role is to acknowledge the buffered data, to see it and trigger the download. And the AP role is to deliver. So the AP indicated data was buffered. The client obviously acknowledged it and triggered it, yet it was not delivered. So in this case, the actor not playing their part in the movie is the access point. So what do? Loud sigh. Well, we have to call support for the access point for the Wi-Fi infrastructure and, see what we can do. Not sure what the problem would be. So anyway, that's what we would do. We would call support for the access point. There's nothing I can do. I make clients. I'm responsible for those. The access point isn't meeting his expectations, and my connectivity is compromised because of that. So here's the next one. Same symptom. Can't ping sometimes. Another U-APSD example, right? Say capture strategy, give me everything, and then let me filter it, right? And the filters I've got, WLAN-ADDR. So this does the TIM map, or the TIM AID value, or you could just do beacons, right? So let's look at T7 capture filter. Not capture filter, sorry. Capture file. So here we go. So beacon frame, we were 0x0D. Data's available. Okay. So we send data to. That's fine. We got data from. So this one, I'll mark it acted as a trigger frame. Here's a from frame, number 6. So great. Okay, all set. We finish our work. That's fine. I'm still in Powersave mode. Here's a null function with pbit set. I'm still in Powersave mode. I never left. So here's a beacon frame with my association ID. 0D, 0D. Whoops. 0D, 0D. Where's the client? Where's the client? Uh-oh. Where's the client? Oh, no. That's a null function. That's kind of a keep alive. That's not a trigger frame. Here's the trigger frame I'm going to get. Wow. So how long was that? Wireshark will tell us. So set time reference. So I went, 7, 8. Yeah, I'm looking at this column. 10. I went 10.6 seconds before I recognized as a client the data was waiting for me. Well, why is that? That's a problem. This is how it breaks. This is what we see. So in this case, right, I'm going to finish up here. First layer of root cause, client AP environment. AP role indicate buffered data. Well, he did. Client role is to trigger it. Client never triggered. So in this case, we have the client is a problem. That's the actor in the movie that's not playing their role. And so what do? Well, we have to look at the client. In this case, I make that client. So that's troubleshooting that I would have to do on our products to figure out why we're missing those beacons, why we're not aligned, why we're ignoring them, or whatever, to figure out the root cause. So anyway, those are just 2 failure examples, and there's some others. Beacon loss, I see in large installations. For whatever reason, the AP does not transmit beacons for a period of time. Could be 30 seconds. Think it's interference related, or for whatever reason, the client doesn't see them, right? And so that's actually catastrophic for legacy Powersave. He needs those beacons with the TIM map to trigger download. It can be bad for U-APSD, but it's not necessarily as bad because if the client is sending regular data, that can be enough to trigger the downlink, even if the client doesn't see the TIM entry. So the TIM map entry for himself, right? But whereas for the legacy, he needs to see that to issue the PS polls. So anyway, it can be catastrophic. And catastrophic is, just no data flows and customers. It's a big dissatisfier, obviously, when your network isn't communicating. There's also implementation issues we've run into quite a bit. Misuse of the M-bit. They don't use it, right? So there could be 10 frames in the buffer. They don't use the M-bit. So what's the client going to do, right? Okay, so he'll see the beacon. He'll issue the PS poll or the trigger frame. One data might, if he's in legacy Powersave, one data frame comes down, but the other 9 are still sitting in there. So it's just kind of difficult to get anywhere from that standpoint. So anyway, summary, Powersave mode can save significant amounts of power. We saw that. It can be nice. It can save money, save weight. No free lunch though. Different mechanisms can be used to optimize trade-offs such as latency. You can tune your DTIM. You can even tune your beacon interval. I never do, but I've seen people do it. And there are plenty of failure modes, many of the same symptoms. But by the way, a packet capture here is the only way I know of really to get to the next layer. I've never seen a log file to go in this level of detail to tell me that, it's who the bad actor was in a Powersave mechanism fault. I've just never seen a log file that would do that, and Wireshark's just a great tool to be able to do that. So anyway, that's it. Please fill out the survey. Thank you for joining us. It is 9:15 on the dot, so I think we are done. We had one question. So we have time. So how to capture 802.11 packets? Well, so you need special hardware, right, at the end of the day. Let me go back to that slide. right, in the beginning. So we need an OTA capture, and you have to be set up for it. Powersave. Now, some things we need. OTA capture. Yeah, so here we are. So how to capture 802.11 packets. Yeah, so you might need hardware. MacBook is very nice at doing that, even though it's not perfect. Linux is great, but can be tricky. Maybe next SharkFest, maybe I'll do one of the sessions on how to capture on a system. But Mike Kershaw had some good notes yesterday on his session on how to capture and what his system can do to grab packet captures. But that's about all I can say at this point. It just isn't easy. NPCap was supposed to, which gets installed with Wireshark to allow you to capture packets. That's supposed to do Wi-Fi, but I got to tell you, it really doesn't work for me. Never really has. I mean, have I gotten 802.11 packets out of NPCap, over the past couple of years? Every once in a while, yeah, I've gotten a couple of packets, but then there's always something. I can't change channels. I can't do this, or I can't. It'll only do 2.4. It wouldn't do 5. It just isn't effective. So, it'd be great if they could get that working. But for right now, you've got to use other systems like, Macs or Linux or something. So, another question. Could power saving mode mitigate denial of service attacks in, say, medical devices? Yes. So, in fact, yeah. So some of the testing I have to do is packet storming. And we run into trouble with this, in fact, with Powersave mode, because while you're asleep, right, while the client's asleep and traffic's coming in, right, it doesn't matter, right? You're not hearing it. It doesn't matter. You won't see it, so it won't happen. So that helps, right, with packet loading. But when you do wake up and there is data there, all of a sudden, it can be a problem. We've also seen variations in access points that, I'll say don't meet the specification. So I would argue that as soon as you have a Powersave client, you're supposed to buffer group traffic and send it to DTIM. And so that kind of limits the amount of group traffic that can come out of an access point. But we've seen some chipsets, AC Wave 2 ones, I won't say the vendor, that actually kind of ignore that and just dump the group traffic, no matter what, onto the network. So we've seen that as well. So, so in some cases it can help. So what traffic generator do you recommend for Wi-Fi or Ethernet? So, so we generate traffic all the time at the office in the lab, manager lab. So I do all the time. So I have a number of tools. At the high end, I use an Ixia traffic generator. So that gives me full line rate gigabit. That's what we paid for. So that's what we have for those devices. And then I'll bridge that over to Wi-Fi. I'll use particular types of traffic that I need to get them across. And I'll use particular access points, actually, based on like what I just described about the behavior that they'll do to, will they bridge all the traffic? Just some of it is a limitation. Some of the higher end Wi-Fi systems actually will limit the amount of broadcast that goes across. So if you try injecting, say, ARP broadcast, they won't pass it, right? So if you try to use that for a test, it won't go. So you need an OTA capture like every time to understand your system to go. For lower quantities of traffic to go, I might use like a MikroTik. That's Linux based, and they have a traffic generator tool, which is kind of awesome. We generate multicast, unicast, and broadcast, turn it on, and then away it goes. We'll inject there. That's for data. If I need to inject controller management traffic, it gets a lot trickier to do. There's a bunch of Linux-based tools to do that, but it's so painful. Building the frames from scratch, getting the format they need, doing the injection. The AirCrack NG suite has some injection tools. I think the AirPCap NX, obviously I can't do highly modulated frames, but they'll send some data as well, so they can do that. So that's what I use for traffic injection. Works pretty well. How much time would you typically spend to analyze the PCAP traffic file on a daily basis? So somewhat depends. Depends on the problems at hand. So I'm in the R&D group. I'm in the software team. We've got about 100 software developers in our particular group in our building. And so, it's anywhere from, say, a half an hour a day at a minimum up to all day. If we have a critical customer issue and he's given me gigabits of packets to go through, and I love that, by the way, right? But you got to do what you got to do. hopefully it's good data. I could spend hours. Yeah, we have automation tools that we've built, automation scripts. We T-Shock, we filter. It's really nice if I could replicate in my lab, right? Because I'm not fully instrumented up in the lab. Coming from the field, it's tougher. But we do, I say we parachute in. You get a critical issue, you just can't get the data you need. Customers are very unhappy. We say we parachute in. You take your tools, go on site, do what you can do. No, okay, guys. I guess I'll be in Discord for a few minutes, and then thank you. Have a good one. Thanks for joining SharkFest this year.